Okay, continuing our study in the book of Hebrews, and we I've been in chapter 11 for a really long time, studying all of these characters checked off right here, and that verse there that just kind of summarizes what shall I more say, for the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and of Barak and of Samson, of Jephthah and David also, and Samuel and of the prophets, and even others. So last time we talked about Gideon. And today we're going to talk about Barak. So let's get some context of the timeline from the Old Testament from creation all the way to the birth of Christ. Here's a rough summary. We've got populating the earth for around 2,000 years almost. These three characters are mentioned in Hebrews 11. Then we go to an age of patriarchs for a couple of hundred years, and all of these characters are referred to in Hebrews 11. Then there's the time that Israel was in Egypt and then the Exodus to begin to move into the promised land. These characters are mentioned in Hebrews from that time. We come to the age of the judges, which is nearly 400 years, occupying the promised land, having made the trip from Egypt and now being established as a nation, but led by these judges that God raised up uh, somewhat just there's no birthright to this. It's just those that God kind of put his hand on that became leaders that elevated the people looked to for leadership during the time of the judges. And these are all mentioned there in that verse we just read. And then it goes to the kingdom age, and these kings, or King David was mentioned, and Samuel and the prophets. But the prophets also continue to operate in the last era of the Old Testament, where the kingdoms of Israel and Judah went into captivity and then were restored, which brings us to the birth of Christ. So Hebrews chapter 11 is a little bit of a survey and summary of the Old Testament in its entirety almost. Um, so here we are looking at Barak out of these that are mentioned, and we'll read these verses of what it says these ones did. It says, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in flight, and in fight, and turned to flight the armies of the aliens. And Gideon definitely gave us a real example of that last week. And so here we're going to go to Judges chapter 4 to look at the story of Barak. But I want to actually get some context, and some of this is going to be a little bit irrelevant, but I just want to take a look at it. So we want to get some location context. This is a map of the Mediterranean Sea and surrounding lands. And this is a modern map, okay? So we have Spain in the north, Morocco in the south, France with Algeria in the south. We have Italy with Tunisia and Libya on the south coast. We have Greece and Turkey on the north with Egypt on the south. Over here on the far east of this map, we have Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. And again, these are the countries that exist there now. Uh, and then Israel is in that little area right there. And it is really fascinating to kind of stay aware of these locations as we read the Old and the New Testament, because a lot of these names are different, but a lot of them are not different. Or they're attached and connected to the same locations and names from the actual Bible times. But let's zoom in specifically on this Israel area. And again, this is modern. So you see these dashed, outlined areas. So Israel is like this kind of uh, downward facing triangle pointing thing here. But over here in the top right, that is the Golan Heights, which is a contested area occupied by Israelis and Arabs, Syrian Arabs. Some recognize it as part of Syria, some as part of Israel. And then in the middle here, we have the West Bank. In other words, the riverbank of the Jordan River. On the east side of the river is the country of Jordan. And back in Old Testament times, the nation of Ammon lived there. And I don't know, it was only a few weeks ago that it hit me that the capital of Jordan, which I've heard of all my life, Amman, Jordan,
Is it on?
is Ammon, the Ammonites, like the Ammonites and Moabites, Amman, Jordan, Ammon. They're still there. This goes all the way back to the days of Lot, Abraham and Lot. Ammon was the son of Lot, Amman, Jordan. Well, so the West Bank is the west side of the riverbank, and that's considered to be part of the state of Palestine now. Um, and they're primarily Palestinians that live there, but there are Israelis who live there. And then we have this thing down here, the Gaza Strip, very famous little thing, and we hear a lot about it in the news, which again is part of the Palestinian state. We see the coast of the Mediterranean, kind of part of the just location wise, what would be land, surrounded by the nation of Israel. Now let's take a look at a map showing us the tribe locations. This is according to the book of Joshua, which is right before the book of Judges that our story today comes from. But I want to jump to a verse from the era of the kings, particularly when David was king. In First Samuel, I'm not David, actually Saul, sorry. But the early era of the kings, there's a story we won't get into. I just want to refer to the fact that it talks about the Philistines, and the cities of the Philistines were Ashdod, Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. Gaza was one of the major cities of the Philistines, the Gaza Strip, the city of Gaza. And so if you look there, it says Philistia in that little spot. That's the same as the Gaza Strip. And on this map, it's showing us that the tribes are not occupying that land, but the Philistines are occupying that land. Well, today the Palestinians occupy that land, an amazingly similar word. And some historians speculate that the actual peoples of the Palestinians are not historically rooted to the same people of the Philistines, but others think they are. And whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's just fascinating, though, how much history ties back when we read even the early Old Testament stories. Those are roots of things that are in our world today. Um, Now, Judges, again, this map is based on what was said in Joshua, but the first chapter of Judges tells us that the tribe of Judah took Gaza and Askelon and Ekron with the coast. So, saying at the time of Judges chapter 1, uh, the tribe of Judah moved all the way out and took that whole coastline. It is part of what the Bible calls the promised land, but it's been back and forth because that's Judges chapter 1. First Samuel is later. That's that's the kingdom age. And we see the Philistines are active, they're doing their thing there. So that area has been contested and gone back and forth between control by Jews and non-Jews, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's been a contested area since Moses brought the Israelites to the Jordan River, or almost to the Jordan River, to this very day, still contested. So I just find that fascinating. I'm not making any point. It's just fascinating and
Mhm.
intriguing. To me, it just makes the Bible that much more exciting to read. But um, Okay, now let's zoom in for our story today. This area is where things take place. Okay, so we're going to go to the story and then we'll come back to this map and we'll place things on this map. Judges chapter 4 says the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord when Ehud was dead. So he was a judge that had redeemed and delivered. And this is what the book of Judges is all about, going back and forth between Israel getting comfortable and in their comfortable state doing evil and becoming unfaithful to God, but then in their oppressed state turning back to God and crying out, and then God sending a deliverer, and then them being blessed until they fall back away. And it's just back and forth throughout the whole book. Verse 2 says, the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, the Canaan land, the Canaanites, that reigned in Hazor, the captain of whose host or army was Sisera, which dwelt in Harosheth of the Gentiles. And the children of Israel cried unto the Lord, as they tended to do, for he, Jabin or Sisera, had 900 chariots of iron. That's a pretty good army. And 20 years he mightily oppressed the children of Israel. So let's take a look here. And we see that Jabin the king was from Hazor. So this is the northern part of the promised land. And that Sisera, the town that he lived in that's named there, is not something you find on the map a lot, but it's right in that ballpark along that river at the south of the tribe of Asher domain there. So this northern area of Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, Issachar, this is the place of this stronghold that's oppressing Israel at this time. Now let's go ahead and continue the story. Verse 4, Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, she judged Israel at that time. Now, I want to do a quick side note. I was tempted to do a whole Bible study on this, but I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to mention there is some controversy sometimes that comes up because of some of the verbiage in a couple of New Testament passages where some people think that the Bible teaches that women should not be leaders in uh, the things of God, like in the church or even in political arenas or whatever. Some people think that. Obviously, this is a minority view, but it is something that comes up sometimes, particularly one reason it's a minority view, to be honest, is because many of us, the majority of people in the world today, even those that profess to be Bible believers, don't really look that close at the Bible to have it instruct their lives. For the most part, people live by a compass that comes from non-biblical sources, cultural norms, and they just live that way and don't really pay that much attention to even know what the Bible even says. But then when we start to get really serious about looking at the Bible to say and let it tell me things, even if it seems abnormal, then some people notice these passages and they think that it is saying that women should not be leaders. In reality, though, when you really study the Bible, we find that that would be a ridiculous thing to take from those passages because there are multiple examples in the Bible of women being leaders, of God positioning women as leaders, including during the New Testament time and including working alongside those very writers who wrote those passages that are at issue in that controversy. So again, I'm not doing the Bible study on it today, but I just want to mention that yeah, there were more men in leadership positions in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, but there were women in leadership positions. And in God's church today, there are women in leadership positions, and that is the will of God, and it God blesses it. There's nothing non-biblical about women being leaders. So here we have a woman named Deborah who is the judge. She's the top. Now, she's the wife of this guy, but he's not the judge. It doesn't even tell us that he's a prophet. She is a prophetess. She utters the word of the Lord. She has the hand of God on her life, and the hand of God has been so pronounced on her life that the people of Israel have begun to look to her for leadership during that time. Okay, verse 5 says, she dwelt under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in Mount Ephraim, and the children of Israel came up to her for judgment. Now let's take a look really quick where that is. She's down here in the southern part of the tribe of Ephraim. Now that's bordering on Benjamin, which borders on Judah. And you have the city of Jerusalem down there, which ultimately would become the capital of Israel and is today the historical capital of Judea and Israel. So she's a little north of that. The palm tree of Deborah's, where they come to get her word on things. Jabin and Sisera are way up north. She's down south. All right, so verse 6 says, she sent and called Barak, the son of Abinoam, out of Kadesh Naphtali, and said unto him, hath not the Lord God of Israel commanded, saying, go and draw toward Mount Tabor, and take with thee 10,000 men of the children of Naphtali and of the children of Zebulun? She said the Lord commanded. Remember, she's a prophetess. So she is a recipient of the word of the Lord, and she speaks what thus saith the Lord. And so she's saying, hey, Barak, God has spoken to me, and this is the instruction that God has given. This whole thing of has not the Lord spoken, that way of saying something is, you'll find that here and there throughout the Old Testament. It's obviously it's rhetorical. It's her saying, hey, this is what God said. And more of what God said, I will draw unto thee to the river Kishon Sisera, the captain of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his multitude, and I will deliver him into thine hand. All right, so let's take a look at this on the map, what we've added to this. Barak lived in Kadesh, which this map shows Kadesh at the northern area of Naphtali. And you'll probably hear me pronounce the tribe of Naphtali like 5 different ways. But this is not certain. It may be that the city of Kadesh was located at the southwestern area of the Sea of Galilee, down where that other arrow is pointing. Also, there may have been more than one city of Kadesh. Now, she specifically said Kadesh Naphtali, right? There's for sure a Kadesh way down south in Judah. And just like Gainesville, Florida, Gainesville, Georgia, Kadesh Naphtali, Kadesh, Judah, which Kadesh. But there may have even been more than one, maybe one time or another, even in Naphtali. So we're not sure exactly which of these areas. You can kind of picture the story either way. Now, here is Mount Tabor, and she told him to gather men from the tribe of Naphtali and Zebulun, which are kind of like all the people that would live in between the hometown of Jabin and the hometown of Sisera, but gather them up at Mount Tabor. And again, if I picture Barak living at that southern option, that kind of makes more sense, but it could be either way. And then the Lord said that Sisera is going to draw Sisera to this river, which is right there. Well, that's pretty much by his hometown anyway. And I would imagine that probably a really good way to get from his home base to Mount Tabor would be along the riverside. And so that's kind of what we're what seems to be the military strategy in the instructions that God is giving. So Barak, we don't get any backstory on Barak at all. The context of the story implies that during this struggle that's been going on for 20 years, there's been fighting going on during this time. But Jabin, with Sisera as his captain, keeps winning and becomes more and more powerful, and the Israelites become less and less powerful in these struggles. Barak apparently is a military leader in that region. And, with transportation and communication being what it was at the time, when we look at a map of Israel, it's not like, a unified country and nation like we're familiar with today. It's kind of a rough confederacy of people. And what's happening in one area is not necessarily, being heard and felt really prominently in another area. But so this is something that's going on up there primarily. Barak is fighting the battle, losing battles, but he is known to Jabin and Sisera as a military competitor. Okay, back to the story. Verse 8, Barak said unto her, If thou wilt go with me, then I will go. But if thou wilt not go with me, then I will not go. I don't know. I get the feeling Barak is tired of losing. And he's like, okay, yeah, right. I've been up here fighting this fight. You're way down south. And now you're going to send me a message telling me to get this army together and fight Sisera. I've been fighting Sisera. I'm, I've lost enough. But I tell you what, I'll do it, but not by myself. I'm not just going to just go, but I'll do it if you go with me. And so Deborah says, I'll go with you. I will surely go with thee. Notwithstanding, the journey that thou takest shall not be for thine honor, for the Lord shall sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. And Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. So, in other words, I'll go ahead and go, but just recognize this, you know, I've kind of become the most elevated leader of our whole nation. If I'm there, I'm going to get credit for the victory. The Lord's promised the victory to you, and but with me being there, it's going to be me that gets the credit for this. We'll work together on it. That's fine. But Barak had no problem with that. And that's one thing I think we kind of can take away as a biblical example to us from Barak. Who cares who gets the credit? Let's do the will of God and let's accomplish what God sent us to accomplish and forget about credit. It doesn't matter. So we're talking about these guys going to Mount Tabor there, Deborah going up from the south to get there, Barak heading from the north, maybe a little bit, maybe a more significant distance, and they're gathering up at Mount Tabor. And Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. First, meet him at Kadesh. That's one reason why I feel like it seems more likely that it's by the Sea of Galilee, because he's going to get them to come to Kadesh first, then go to Mount Tabor from there. Um, so they gathered together, and then Deborah went up with him to Mount Tabor. Now, this is a weird thrown in verse. Now, Heber the Kenite, which was of the children of Hobab, the father in law of Moses, had severed himself from the Kenites and pitched his tent unto the plain of Zaanaim, which is by Kadesh. So here's a guy that's being introduced to the story, brand new right now, has nothing to do with what's going on. But he's pitched a tent near Kadesh. Now, it says he's of the children of Moses's father-in-law. Moses's father-in-law was, usually we know him by the name Jethro. There's actually three different names attributed to him in different passages in the Bible. The first place he's mentioned, he's called Reuel. And then here he's called Hobab, but most frequently he's called Jethro. Um, the Bible tells us that he was a Kenite. Now, Kenites are known historically to have been a nomadic people, which kind of fits this guy, Heber, says he's, pitched his tent. He picked a place to pitch his tent. That's what nomadic peoples do, right? Um, and they were some type of smiths, apparently. The word Kenite refers to forging. So may have been a forger of weapons. And so it may be that his travels around here have to do with selling weapons to maybe both sides of this conflict. I'm just speculating stuff right now, but I'm just talking about some stuff that kind of fits what we see in the scriptures. Um, but also Moses' father-in-law was a Midianite. He was a priest of Midian, and the Midianites were not descendants of Israel or Jacob, but they were descendants of Abraham. So they're Semitic people. So there is some kinship here between Heber and the people of Israel. But Heber's people, the Kenites, they did not go to Egypt. They were never in slavery in Egypt, and they did not come through the wilderness to now come and inhabit the promised land. But they're loosely connected. They're family, distant through generations. But the Bible lets us know, and I think we're going to see the wording in a minute, that at this time, Heber was friendly with Jabin, the king, the enemy king. He's friendly with him. So it's like he's not really part of either side, but blood wise has more connections to the Israelites. But what's specified here is that he's friendly with Jabin, maybe making weapons for Jabin and Sisera's army. Again, that's completely speculation on my part, but maybe that's what he was doing. Verse 12, and they showed Sisera, or they told Sisera, revealed to Sisera, that Barak the son of Abinoam was gone up to Mount Tabor. So he gets the news. And now we've immediately left Heber. It's just thrown in there about Heber. We'll find out why in a minute. Verse 13, Sisera gathered together all his chariots. How many did he have? 900. All his chariots, even 900 chariots of iron, and all the people that were with him from Harosheth of the Gentiles unto the river of Kishon. All the people were with him from Harosheth of the Gentiles unto the river of Kishon. So they went to the river, just exactly like God had prophesied they would do. And they're heading to Mount Tabor to confront Barak. So this is where I say Barak was known to Sisera, because they just brought news to Sisera. Hey, Barak is gathered at Mount Tabor. They didn't mention Deborah. They just mentioned Barak, because this is who he's been fighting. And he said, okay, he's come out of hiding. I'm going to take care of that. So that's where we have them traveling to from approximately where that Sisera arrow is at, along the riverbank to Mount Tabor. And Deborah said unto Barak, up, for this is the day in which the Lord hath delivered Sisera into thine hand. Is not the Lord gone out before thee? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor, and 10,000 men after him. And the Lord discomfited Sisera and all his chariots and all his host with the edge of the sword before Barak, so that Sisera lighted down off his chariot and fled away on his feet. So they're losing the battle. 900 chariots are being overcome by the 10,000 men because the Lord went out before them. And so he takes off running. To why would you get off of your chariot and run on foot? Chariots are faster than feet, right? Two possible reasons. One is your chariot is damaged, but another reason is because you want to be able to run through terrain where your chariot will not go. So you're not going along the riverside where things are flat, but you're headed off into the woods or something along those lines. But Barak pursued after the chariots and after the host unto Harosheth of the Gentiles, and all the host of Sisera fell upon the edge of the sword, and there was not a man left. So Barak, first of all, they clash. They're at Mount Tabor. Sisera's people come from Harosheth along the riverbank. Then Barak and them come down. They hit head on. They clash, and Barak's armies defeat Sisera's armies. Then Sisera's armies retreat. And Barak and them did not just celebrate and say, we won the battle, but instead they pursued after them unto Harosheth, pursued the chariots. So the chariots are in retreat mode, but Sisera is not part of that. He has gotten out of his chariot and headed north off of the roads that chariots can travel. So Sisera fled away on his feet, and he finds himself at the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. So verse 11 told us that Heber the Kenite had pitched his tent near Kadesh. And again, this is where that southern Kadesh location kind of makes more sense because he got there on foot. For there was peace between Jabin, the king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. That's where I mentioned they were kind of somewhat in league together. And so Sisera finds this tent. It's the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber. And he's like, oh, this is our guy. This is our guy who is an ally to my king. Maybe he's even a weapons manufacturer, or maybe a chariot manufacturer. And Jael, the wife of Heber, went out to meet Sisera and said unto him, turn in, my lord, turn in to me, fear not. And he's like, yeah, sure. You're not an Israelite. You're this family that's an ally with us. And when he had turned in unto her into the tent, she covered him with a mantle, which is kind of like a shawl. And he said unto her, give me, I pray thee, a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. And she did him one better. She opened a bottle of milk and gave him drink and covered him. So milk to me is tastier than water. You get the hydration, but it's tastier. But there's something extra going on with her giving him a bottle of milk. It's not just to be extra kind. You know, this guy has been running on foot from the battleground all the way up near Kadesh. And she covers him with a mantle to bundle up and get comfy. He's thirsty. She gives him milk. And then he says, stand in the door of the tent, and it shall be when any man doth come inquire of thee and say, is there any man here? That thou shalt say no. And he's like, this is perfect, man. This is a hideout where I can be. She's going to cover for me. I can rest. It's going to work out great. And what does he do? He goes to sleep. That's why she gave him milk instead of water, to make him more sleepy. He's already tired and exhausted. And she covers him up, comforting, and gives him milk. And he lies down and goes to sleep. Now, look what Jael did. And remember, there's some kinship here to the Israelites. And apparently, I don't know for sure about Heber, but apparently Jael feels more connection by way of her Semitic connection to the Israelites than she does through their little peace alliance with the king of Hazor, Jabin, and or like Rahab the harlot, she just believed the stories of how God worked on behalf of the Israelites and chose to align herself with the Lord and with the people of Israel. So let's look at what she did. Then Jael, Heber's wife, took a nail of the tent and took a hammer in her hand and went softly. She snuck up on him, went softly unto him, smote the nail into his temples of his head, and fastened it into the ground. For he was fast asleep and weary. So he died. Probably what I would have done. He's lying there with his head sideways on the ground. She gets up. He is sleepy enough and sound asleep enough that she's able to place this nail on one temple. And she must have been pretty strong and she must have been pretty skilled with that hammer because she nailed that thing down and threw his head through the other temple into the ground and staked this man to the ground. And behold, as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him and said unto him, Come, and I will show thee the man whom thou seekest. And when he came into her tent, behold, Sisera lay dead, and the nail was in his temples. So God subdued on that day Jabin the king of Canaan before the children of Israel. Subdued, I italicized it just because it connects to Hebrews 11. So they subdued kingdoms. And here we have Barak subduing kingdoms. But in that battle, he's the primary leader. But as far as Sisera being killed, he wasn't even there when it happened. Deborah said he'll fall by the hand of a woman. And I'm sure that I assume that Barak probably heard that the way I heard it when I first read the story, and that woman being Deborah. But she's prophesying. Deborah herself may not have even understood that she was talking about some other woman. But God prophesied, and prophecy has layers. Prophecy, when God speaks, he can say more than one thing at the same time with the same phrases of words. And when he said into the hand of a woman, that can be applied in reference to Deborah being the leader in that battle. But it also is this woman here, Jael, an unheard of woman who literally with her own hand killed the captain of the host. And the hand of the children of Israel prospered, and they prevailed against Jabin, the king of Canaan, until they had destroyed Jabin, king of Canaan. Now, in our lives and in our day and age, we're not fighting a lot of military battles, but we're fighting spiritual battles. And Barak was tired of fighting, and you may be tired of fighting. But the word of the Lord is saying, hey, I'm going to deliver your enemies into your hand. I'm going to give you victory. And we need to step up and respond and do what God says to do, because Romans chapter 8 says that if God be for us, who can be against us? And in all these things, we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. God gives the victory. Your circumstances don't dictate your outcome. Act by faith, do what God says to do, and you will have victory.